Appreciate you joining me today. We're going to be looking when Joseph was sold into slavery. Our hymn today is a hymn called God Meant It for Good.
Joseph did suffer at his brother's hands. Thrown into the pit, he cried at their plans. Sold into slavery, by their lie they stood. They meant it for evil, God meant it for good.
Verse 2. God showed him favor in Egyptian life. Troubles soon found him from his master's wife. Down in the dungeon, all her lies contrived. His God was with him and saved many alive. Faithful in prison, to him dreams were told. Truth from the two men he would not withhold. The baker could help Joseph if he tried. 2 years forgotten, but still God would provide. When, like with Joseph, we face hatefulness, know that our Jesus faced the harder test. For there at Calvary they misunderstood. Man meant it for evil, God meant it for good. To look at our passage now in Genesis 37. Verse 12, Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, and notice, and Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. And then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him there, and says, What are you seeking? And so he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And so when they see Joseph coming, they conspire against him to kill him. And they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him, and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. They sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing all their wares on their way to carry them to Egypt. So Judah says, What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? And the idea is hatched to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and his brothers listened. And so that's what happens. Judah returns. Judah had apparently parted for a time and returns to the pit. Joseph isn't there. He says, The lad is no more. Where shall I go? They end up taking Joseph's tunic, killing a kid of the goats, dipping the tunic in blood, presenting the tunic to Jacob, and Jacob tears his clothes and thinks his son is dead. I shall go down to the grave to my son in mourning, as his sons who were deceitful arose to comfort him. And Joseph is on his way down to Egypt. What points might we make? Well, one is this, and to think about God meant it for good. You know, there Joseph is, and it's like the Lord sent the dreams to Joseph. It's not Joseph's fault that Jacob gave him the coat of many colors. Joseph is suffering. And one of the issues is, and it's the same issue that's found in Job. Why is this happening? And what we have to recognize is that God allowed it to happen. God allows suffering to happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that God causes it. And I have to be very careful. And we should, you don't lay evil at God's feet. You don't do that. However, God did send the dreams. Would Jacob, and I was thinking about Rachel being barren for all those years. If Joseph would have been the firstborn, would this relationship with his brothers be so tumultuous? God's purpose is found in all this. So while God did not cause his brothers to hate him, the way that God is, and God's ways are higher than our ways, the way that God is arranging things, it is a part of the reason that his brothers hate him. But God is allowing Joseph to suffer. And the Lord allows us to suffer. Not only is the Lord allowing Joseph to suffer, God is allowing all these things to happen, and he's using all of these things. Right? God meant it for good. The hymn, that quote, God meant it for good, is found later on when it's all said and done, years later. When Joseph is talking to his brothers and he says, I know you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good to save many people alive. God allowed the things to happen, and God was using these things. That is an odd thing, that God uses wickedness. He doesn't cause wickedness, at least not directly. And I just have to, we need to be careful in how we think about God. But God uses it, just like God's going to use Pharaoh. God uses it. What we have to do is back up and see the bigger picture. And here with Joseph, there's a much bigger picture than just him and his brothers. God was using all of this. God was allowing it, because how else are you going to get everyone? How else are you going to get Israel down in Egypt? You don't get the Exodus unless you get Israel in Egypt. You don't get Israel in Egypt unless there's a famine. You're not able to save the family and get the family to move down there unless you have Joseph already in place. You don't, one of the other things that happens in all of that is God is going to judge the Egyptian gods. That doesn't happen unless Israel's down there, unless the family is down there. And so there's a much bigger picture here than just Joseph with his brothers. The things that Joseph is suffering individually, and he comes to realize God meant it for good to save many people alive, and all of this is happening. How else? Think about how the part that this has to play in fulfilling the prophecy made to Abraham. When God says to Abraham, your family, your descendants are going to be someplace else, and they're going to be in bondage. This is a piece of the fulfillment of that prophecy. There's a much bigger picture. When we're suffering, we need to recognize God allows it. We need to recognize that God uses it. And we need to realize it's part of a much bigger picture. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day. Join us tomorrow for another portion of our Daily Praise.